Welcome back to Morning Sun Homestead. If you've watched our videos before, welcome back. If you're new here to just see what our content's all about, welcome. Today we're going to be making some different snacks that you can use in the kitchen that will be very convenient for your children if you're homeschooling or from when they come home from school or whatever I'm sorry to be preoccupied. It's just that we have a cow that's ready to calf and I see her coming to the barn. So I wonder what she's up to. We'll have to go check that out here in a few minutes. It's also good for if you're going to travel. We're going to be making granola bars. We're also going to be making Cheez-Its. We've had that recipe on our site before. This time we're going to make it from whole wheat instead of all-purpose flour. Both ways are good. The girls do prefer the all-purpose flour, and my husband does too. But sometimes I just like to try to give them the whole benefit of health. And the last thing that we're going to be making is fruit roll-ups. And we're going to do strawberry. So, let's get started. It is so simple to buy snacks from the grocery store, but a lot of that is highly processed. And what we're making today is not going to be the same way. This is stuff that you can make in your own kitchen. And when you are in charge of the ingredients that goes in your family's snacks or food, then you are taking a whole health to a whole new level. Because you're able to purchase good things from the grocery store, healthy things, organic things, things that are non-bio, and also things that's not highly processed or things that's not been sprayed. So when we take that into our own hands, we're going to have a whole change of how we eat. The first thing that we're going to make is going to be the granola bars. Another good advantage of being able to make your own snacks at home. If you have smaller children or you have grandchildren, they love to be able to help make the snacks. And when they help make the snacks, they're also anxious to eat them. So that's a good way to incorporate healthy food into their diet. Now what we're going to start with first is going to be the crunchy homemade granola bars. Everyone likes granola bars, but we also know that a lot of our granola bars in the grocery store have a lot of bad ingredients in them. We are just going to put a few ingredients in ours, throw them in the oven. They're going to be able to keep in the refrigerator for up to 3 weeks. And this will be something that you can most certainly use as a snack when they come home from school, during homeschooling, any kind of trip, or any other thing that I had listed before. So, to get started, we're going to need 4 cups of oats. Now, Quaker oats have been sprayed with all sorts of pesticides. So you want to try to find the more organic oat that you can. Autoimmune disorder because as I was growing up, I did not eat very healthy. So I've really started paying attention to everything that we're eating in our home because I've noticed if I eat an inflammatory diet, I get really stiff and I get really sore and I break out in my skin. So I'm really contributing all that to unhealthy gut. So we have tried to start making everything that's possible to be made in our home, because if I got that at a young age and that was, I'm not a spring chicken, so I know that back then our food was even a little bit healthier than what it is now. But still, if I got that then, what are kids today looking at? What they're going to get when they're eating all this processed stuff. So the more food that you can make at home, the better off we're going to be. And we just need to look for healthy products when we do buy it. We can never forego our health. I know Quaker oats would probably be less expensive. I just haven't bought any forever of those, so I really don't know. But anyway, these are going to be organic, and they're not sprayed with the herbicides, and you can tell the difference. When I was eating the Quaker oats, when I would eat them, I would automatically start itching. So I knew that there was something in there that was setting me off. And that's one of the major things that made me sit back and look at exactly what we're eating was the oats. Because we would have oatmeal and then I would itch and I would break out. And the next morning I'd be so sore, my joints would ache. So that was one of the goals of when we first started, and I looked at all that and I would notice when I ate oats what would happen. We're going to add shredded coconut and we're going to add some wheat flour, and that's freshly ground wheat that we just ground this morning. We're going to add cinnamon and salt. And as always, we will put the recipes in the description below. And this is kind of a long video we're making, so, just bear with us, and I think by the end of it, you will understand that you can do all this, and if you just allot some time on a Saturday, you can sit down and you can do all this just as well, and you can have a week worth of snacks for your family. Now, you can add dried fruit. This can be whatever choice you come up with. This is some dried blueberries that we have dried ourselves. We also had some plums. We decided not to do those. But any dried fruit that you want. You can use cranberries, apples, peaches, strawberry. It's entirely up to you. But you do need a fruit of some sort because it's going to help act as a binder. And it's full of nutrition as well. And once we get that in there, we're going to stir all that up. And we're going to add nuts. The nuts is something else that you can add, whatever your preference may be. I'm going to use almonds, and we need to chop them because that's way too big to be in there. So I have this NutriBullet chopper. Put this in here, and we'll get that started. You don't have to make it as fine as this. I just do that because some of our girls have braces, and when you have whole nuts with braces, a lot of times you can't eat them because you can always break them. So I just grind ours really fine, and that way they're still getting all the nutrients that they need, but they're able to eat it because they're all broken down. And in the pan on the stove behind me, we have coconut oil and we have butter. And the butter is going to be butter that we have made, but anything that we have here that we have made ourselves, you can purchase from the store and use. Do not let it persuade your decision that, oh, I can't do this because she's using everything that they've made. Nope, that's not the way it is. You can eat healthy from the store even if you do have to buy everything. So don't let that stop you. But anyway, I have coconut oil and I have butter, and we're going to melt that. While that's melting, once it's done, we need to add honey. Now, this honey that I have in the jar has crystallized, but this is also raw honey, and I do not want to use it in this because it's going to be heated to 325 degrees in the oven, and that's going to kill most of the beneficial enzymes that's in honey. So what I'm going to do, we got some store-bought honey for Christmas, so that's what I'm going to use. We're still getting the main part of the honey in this, like the fruit, is to make a combinding, so it's sticky and it's going to stick together. So we got to have the honey, and I don't see much reason to use our raw honey when we can use it in teas, or the girls like to eat it on fresh bread once it's cooled, and they put cow's butter on it, and then they like to add their raw honey to it. So it's all going to be heated through, and we're going to lose any benefit from it, so we just as well use what we have there. Now, while that's doing that, we need to go ahead and preheat our oven to 350 degrees. Because this does have to bake for approximately 15 minutes, and then we're going to take it out. Our coconut oil and our butter has completely melted, and this is thoroughly mixed. So to this, we are going to add our honey. Grab a muffin pad here so I don't burn the table. If you've ever made granola, leave comments below. So that is a big treasure chest for other people to see that many people do things like this. They're not just a lone wolf trying to do it. And it helps them understand that other people have had failures or success at doing it. So let us know. Let us know how yours has turned out, how you've made it, different things that you've put in it. Once we have it all mixed together, we're going to also put our vanilla in here. Mix all that, and then we're going to pour it into our combination of fruit, nuts, oats, and our coconut. And then we're going to thoroughly mix it. Now, before we started, I prepared my pan, And to do that, you need to line your pan with parchment paper. And I have that set up here. We're going to put this in and press it firmly down on our pan once we're ready. Now we're going to mix this very well. You'll continue to have some dry. You just need to constantly keep putting it up and down and bringing that underneath to the top. I've mixed this really well. It doesn't seem to me like it's going to be sticky enough. So to that, I'm going to add a little bit more honey. And we're just going to add this in because it's still warm from where we melted the butter and the coconut oil. We're going to mix that again. Now, it's not automatically going to begin sticking together in the bowl. It's going to have to be pressed into the pan. So let's move our pan over here and get ready to put this in and press it. Parchment paper doesn't like me very well. It's always a fight of trying to get everything in and not lose the paper or not slide it. So, oh, this is going better. I had been using the white parchment paper, but then my daughter got to studying about, it's got some sort of products that's petroleum on that. So we went to the brown now, and we'll see how that works. I did notice when I bake with the brown, it doesn't burn, and the white would burn. So that's something that's different. Okay, now that we have it in the bowl, get my spoon cleaned off here. Don't want to waste any. And I took a nibble of this, and it's very good. So it's very tasty. I'm one of those thrifty cooks. I like to have every morsel that's in the bowl out. Otherwise, I feel like I'm wasting. And I think that's just because groceries are expensive, and I'm probably not the only one that feels that way. Now, you can use a smaller bowl, you can use a larger bowl. That's all going to depend on your thickness. If you use something that's a little bit smaller, your bars are going to be thicker. And because of that, you want to make sure that you bake them a little bit longer. So we're going to press with our spatula. You notice if I press with my fingers, it comes up. So you want to press with your spatula. And I could have a larger spatula, which would make the job go quicker, but this one's already dirty, so I'll just use it. You want to press it firmly, completely around the pan. And now we're going to put it in the oven. Into the oven, I'm going to use the center rack. Top rack, you don't get as much heat. The bottom rack, it can burn. That's my oven. Everybody's oven is different. Okay, we are going to clean up, and then we're going to proceed to our next snack. Our next homemade snack that we're going to make is going to be homemade strawberry roll-ups. So, this can be any fruit that you want to use. Our choice is strawberries just because we have so many of them. We have vacuum sealed these. We're going to cut them open, and you're going to need a blender. Dump them into, and you want to make sure that you just go ahead and dump all the liquid that's in the berries once they're thawed out, or if you're using fresh berries, you won't have all that liquid. But this recipe can be for fresh or frozen, so either one will work. We need 4 cups. I'm just assuming that's about 4 cups. I didn't measure. I don't measure a whole lot. I just put everything together. But when I do my recipes, I try to make sure they're right for you guys, because I don't want you all not knowing what to do. Now we're going to mix these up. Once they're thawed, or even if they're fresh, you might need to add a little bit of water if they're fresh, because they're probably not going to grind up as quickly as what frozen berries that's thawed will. We have a lot more liquid in frozen fruit once it's thawed out. So you might want to add just a little bit of water. I wouldn't add any more than 1/4 of a cup, and I would do a small batch, see how they're going to do. If you need a little bit more water, you can add that. Just don't go overboard, because we are now going to proceed to the pot where we are going to pour this out, and we're going to simmer this for about 10 minutes. Now, any blender would work, a food processor would probably work, whatever choice of equipment that you have in your kitchen. I know that I use equipment that's obsolete, but if it works, I see no reason to get anything new and waste money on that. So that's why my blender is very old. It's 22 years old, and it's just always worked. Me and it has been through thick and thin, so I'm not anxious to get rid of it. We're going to simmer this for approximately 10 minutes on a medium heat. And you're going to need to stir it quite often. Just stay with it. If you're like me, you'll forget and you'll go do something and you'll get involved and you'll come back to a scorched pan. We don't want that because that's going to ruin everything. So I'm just going to stay here with it and stir this as it cooks down for approximately 10 minutes on medium heat. This is cooked for approximately 10 minutes, simmered, honestly. You can see where we initially started, so we did lose some water. We're going to head to the table and add a little bit of sweetener. Now that it is cooked down a little bit, we're going to add our sweetener. Our choice of sweetener is going to be honey, and that would be preferred, but you could also use maple syrup, or you could use regular granulated sugar. Depending on the tartness of your berries, you can add up to 2 tablespoons. But also remember, the more sweetener you add, if you add too much, when your leathers are done, or your roll-ups, they're going to be sticky. They'll be extremely sticky if you add too much sugar. So that's one thing that you don't want to do. Do this, and we're going to mix it up. So we added 2 tablespoons. These strawberries are a little tart. And if you can find a you-pick farm to get strawberries or any berries at all, that's going to be healthier than the store. They probably still spray their berries, and you might be able to find organic you-pick. We haven't ever seen that. We have quite a few you-picks around us, but they're not organic. Just because when they are organic, it's hard for them to be able to keep the bugs off the berries, and they have a large loss. Now, this can be cooked down in the oven at 175 degrees if you want to do that. If you're not able to do it in the oven, we have a dryer. So what we're going to use is our Excalibur dehydrator. And most of the time, a dehydrator will come with liners of your trays. Ours only came with 2. We could have purchased more, we just didn't. So we're just going to use parchment paper. One of the key components when doing a fruit roll-up is to always make sure you grease the sheet that you're going to be putting it on. We prefer coconut oil. That way, if you use lard or you use tallow, sometimes that can leave a taste into the roll-up itself. But you could use coconut oil or olive oil. Either option is a good choice. And that's still pretty hot, so I'm going to grab a ladle to put out onto. Now, you want to make the edges a little bit thicker because in this dehydrator, they're going to dry quicker on the edges. And that way they won't be so dry that they shrivel up and the middle will be wet. As you can see, it's fairly thick because it's not even trying to run. I'm going to have to spread this out with a spatula. Now, some people's ovens will not go down to 175 degrees. If your oven happens to be one of that, you can put it at 200 and just leave your door slightly open. So that will help that to be able to be a little bit cooler than the 200, and you also just want to watch it very closely. And if the children in your lives are anything like the children that are in ours, they want to eat all the time. So this is something that's full of nutrients, and it's very good for them. Ours has breakfast, and while we're eating breakfast, they ask what we're going to be having for supper. So they're always worried about what they're going to have. Okay, so there's our first tray, and it looks nice. So if you need parchment paper, if you don't have liners, I just try to make sure that mine's as wide as what my rack is. Tear it off. And then, of course, it's going to roll. So if you just flip that paper over opposite of what you unrolled it, it's going to lay flat. And then you'll be able to proceed with what you need to do. Any trays that, oh, there I just spilled some. Any trays that you don't use in your dryer, you want to make sure that you take them out. That way the heat will still circulate evenly. And there's no use to have empty trays in there. So we're going to remove any trays that we don't use. Once we have our dryer full, put the lid on, and we are going to set the temperature for 140 degrees. Now this will have to dry for several hours, probably 8, possibly 10, but you need to check it. If it seems like it's dry on top, but the bottom is a little bit wet, you can always peel it off the parchment and flip it if you want to. And then we're going to show you, once it's dry, how we will cut it into strips using the parchment paper and rolling it up. So all you have to do is just unroll and take it off the parchment. Our granola bars have gotten completed. As you can see, they're golden brown. They're not burnt. The edges are a little bit darker than what the insides is, but they're perfectly fine. Now, they've got to cool completely before we can cut them. So don't try to attempt to cut them now, because if you do, they're going to crumble and fall apart. If it's something that you need quickly, let them cool for about 10 minutes and then put them in the freezer, or I would do the freezer if you have to have them soon. Or if it's cold outside, you could use that. Now we're going to move on to our third quick snack, which is going to be Cheez-Its. Cheez-Its is always a much loved snack. Personally, I don't like them, but my husband, even though he's older, he loves to be able to eat Cheez-Its. That's one of his favorite things. And the ones from the store are loaded with all sorts of preserves and things that we don't want to put in our body. The first thing we're going to need is flour. It only calls for 1 cup, but because we eat them quite rapidly, I'm going to do a double batch. And this is a recipe that's very versatile. You can do 3 batches at once if you want to. It all depends on how many you think you need. To that, we're going to add some salt. And we're going to mix that well. We're going to add butter at this point. And you can use, I'm just mixing everything by hand. But you can also use a food processor. You could also probably use a blender. I've never used a blender, but you probably could, as long as it was one of those, maybe like those Ninja blenders that's really got a lot of steam behind them once you turn it on. That would probably work. But what I do, because I don't use any of that, grab my butter. You need to keep your butter cold. And this is cow's butter that I have made. And then I use a grater, and I just grate my butter. That way, if you're going to use the food processor or try the blender, which like I said, I'm not sure the blender would work, you could just cut this into chunks. But I'm going to grate mine on the grater, and it makes it like grated cheese. So it makes it very easy to mix up. Now, we only need 4 tablespoons of this for each one. Get up my butter. So, yeah, that's probably about enough. You probably want to measure and make sure that's what you have. And it would have been neater if I would have did this on a cutting board or something, so I wouldn't have had it all over the table. And then we're going to mix this up. And the key is keeping the butter cold. We do not want to get the butter warm at all. That's the main thing. If you cut your butter ahead of time, you want to make sure that you put it back in the refrigerator so that it stays cool. Now, to this, and once it's been pulsed, whether you do your, like I'm doing, or if you do it in the food processor, we want to add our cheese. Now, you can use any sort of cheese you want to. It can be white cheese, it can be yellow cheese. I prefer white cheese, the cheese that we make, because yellow cheese is not natural. It has to be dyed. So milk is white, it's not yellow. Therefore, your cheese shouldn't really be yellow. But they put a food dye in it in order to do that. So I am using Colby cheese because that's what we currently had. My parents get us things at Christmas that are useful, and they got us a large roll of cheese. They got us some honey, box of apples, which is great because when you're feeding your family, things like that are very handy. So they make really good gifts. So that's the cheese that I'm using now with this recipe. It normally calls for 2 cups for one recipe. I'm going to double that, so I'm probably going to have to grate just a little bit more to get 4 cups. And as I was saying, it is a giant roll. And this is how big it is. So you can see there's a lot of cheese here. But you know, we will eat it. If it gets to the point that we're not and it tries to start molding, I will just cut it and put it on a tray and freeze it, and then I'll take that out and vacuum seal. And that works really well. I have learned though that when you do cheese like that, if you're going to do small thin layers, you want to make sure you individually freeze it on a sheet. If not, when you take it out, as it falls, it sticks together. And then you just have a great big messy lump. So make sure you do that. With the Cheez-Its, they're going to have to cool. So we're going to have to put these in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. But you don't want them to cool for any more than 4. If they do, you're probably going to have to take them out and let them warm up just a little bit. I'm a very messy cook. My daughters do not like when they have to clean up after me because they say that I dirty every dish in the kitchen. And I've always been like that. I don't like to clean up after myself. So I don't blame them for saying that. Now, we're going to mix this very well. And to this, it's because it's all dry, except for the butter. And the butter's been kept cold, so it hasn't melted. It's not going to melt until it's time to start baking it. We've got our flour, we got everything mixed in. To this, we're going to start adding cold water. This needs to be cold directly from the tap, or it can be put in the refrigerator and chilled, however you want to do it. We need 3 tablespoons per recipe. So this even has a little bit of ice, which is not going to hurt. So I'm going to need 6. If it's not enough, you can always add a little bit more, but only start to add a teaspoon at a time when you need to add more. You don't want to get this too wet because it has to be rolled. And if it's too wet, then you're going to end up adding flour, and then it's going to have an off taste. We don't want to do that. So we're just going to add a little bit at a time and make sure that we have it all good. Okay, I'm going to mix this up and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. As you can see, it's fairly damp, but we are still having some crumble. And we want to be able to use all that and bring it together. At this point, I'm not going to add any more water. I'm just going to work it here a little bit and see what it does. As you can see, it's starting to come together nicely. So I think the 6 tablespoons will be sufficient. And also, I think I forgot to tell you, the flour that I used was freshly ground wheat. There is different kinds of wheat. You have a hard red wheat and you have a hard white wheat. And there's 3 different kinds of berries. And you can use anything but they work better for different things. What I'm using now is the hard white wheat. Don't know if that's, I don't know if that's especially what that would be for, is pastries and things like that, or if it's more for bread. It's all about the gluten in the berry. So that's one thing I will study out, and I'll have to let my wonderful audience know about. As you can see, I did not need to add any more water. It's all come together. I'm going to put a lid on this, put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours. Our Cheez-It dough has cooled for 2 hours. I'm just going to break this in 2 because it makes it a little bit easier to be able to roll. Now, this needs to be about an eighth of an inch thick. And you can roll it in a square, however, because we're going to cut it with a pizza cutter anyway. And what I do is I put it through a pastry cutter because it will roll it very flat for me. And the thinner your Cheez-Its, the crunchier they're going to be. And that's what we're looking for. But if you don't have a pastry roller, don't worry about it. Roll it as thin as you possibly can because it's not impossible. As you can see right here, I have just rolled it, and I'll roll this again. See? That's about the thickness that we need. I just do it because maybe I'm too lazy to try to keep rolling with the rolling pin. So I'll roll it through my pastry roller. Okay, I'm going to cut this down and put it through my pastry roller. We need to have a prepared sheet, so I'm going to do that, and we'll lay them on there. I found that it's easier to cut them on the parchment paper and then be able to lift the parchment paper and put it on your pan. Then try to cut them and individually do it that way. The reason that I do not go ahead and lay mine in the pan is because when I get ready to cut, I use one of these pans that I'm not sure, it could be Teflon, so I only cook on it when I have parchment paper on top of it. It's an old pan that we've had for quite a few years, as you can tell by the darkness of it. But anyway, when I'm cutting, I cannot run the pizza cutter because of the lip. So I found that it's easier just to lay my parchment paper over. When I'm done, I can gradually drag it over. So you can cut these in any shape that you want. And you can cut off this jagged edge if you want to, and it could be re-rolled, however you want to do it. This is your Cheez-Its. You do with them what you want, whatever you think your family would like. Now, one thing that we do is we do put a toothpick in the center of each Cheez-It, and that makes it have a little bit of an air hole. So they're not going to be puffing up, and you'll have all that air. And that does take a little bit more time, but we've done it without doing the air hole. And like I said, they get kind of puffy, and they don't get as crispy as what they will if you make the air hole. All right, so we're going to proceed on with making the rest. Now, I've made these with whole wheat flour. They're a little bit more crumbly than if you was to make them with white flour or all-purpose flour. So when I put it through my pastry roller, and this I'm even having a hard time getting up, but when I put it through my pastry roller, it's starting to come apart. That's why these are in small pieces, which is no big deal, but just trying to tell you that if you use wheat flour, it may be a little bit different for you. When you're approximately halfway through rolling of the dough, you want to start your oven to 350 degrees. We're going to bake in the middle rack for about 15 minutes. But with these, you want to be really careful because they'll burn on the bottom and not look that way. So at about the 9-minute mark, you want to check them, and then you want to check them again at about the 10-minute mark. Now, when you get ready to roll these out, especially with the whole wheat, you may need to add a little bit of flour as a dusting on your surface that you're going to roll. Not to the dough itself, but just as a dusting, and that will help it not be so sticky. And as I said, if you're particular about what your cheeses look like, you can always cut the ragged edges off and re-roll however many times you need to. We're not particular. They all taste the same, so I just do it this way. They don't look as good if you took your time and did that, but they're still edible, and that's what matters. So let me continue working these up, and then I'll show you how I pull them onto the tray. And I just pull them off the table onto my tray. Now, we don't want any of these to overlap, so if they are overlapping, we're going to need to rearrange our trays just a bit. Because if they're overlapping, they're not going to cook correctly. So we want to make sure we do that. And we're going to put this one, since it's a shorter tray, in the middle rack. The larger tray, we're going to put on the top rack. The middle rack, the middle tray, this tray in the middle rack, will get done faster than the other because of the heat. So you want to make sure that you watch these because they are prone to burn on the bottom. And we don't want to do that. My oven's not up yet, so I'm going to wait for that to happen before I pop these in. In the meantime, our oven's up to 350 degrees. Then I'm going to put the smaller tray in the middle so the heat can still go up. I'll put it on top. In about 9 minutes, I'm going to check to see how they're doing. Our granola bars have come out of the oven and we've set them on the table. They have cooled completely. So now we're in the process of cutting them. They may cut a little hard when we first start, and you may have some things that look like they're going to come apart. Just use a good sharp knife. You can cut these in whatever shape that you want to, or you can just cut them in a regular bar. It really is your personal preference. Then just kind of wiggle your knife down to get them apart. And we can cut them. And there we have them. The Cheez-Its have come out of the oven. They baked for approximately 12 minutes, so they didn't go the full 15. We've tasted them, and we prefer the all-purpose Cheez-Its more than the whole wheat, but the recipe is exactly the same, so there won't be any difference. So we have two of our snacks here in front of me, the bars and the Cheez-Its. We're waiting on the fruit roll-ups to get done, and we'll show you what those look like. The fruit roll-ups have came off. They're completely done. Now, there's two ways to store these. You can either peel them off the paper, or you can leave them on the paper and then cut with a sharp knife or a pair of scissors. And then you can just roll them up and store them in a jar, and you can leave them on the counter or you can put them in the refrigerator, whichever way you want to do it. So that's the first way. The second way, you can peel it completely up, and it's more like a fruit leather, and then you would cut it again, or you could cut it into pieces. It depends on the children that you have. If you have smaller children, you may want to do the pieces. It'd be easier for them to handle, but it's always fun to take them off the sheet. So they may enjoy doing that best. One thing you don't want to forget is it's most certainly important to grease your sheets. If you don't grease your sheets with coconut oil or olive oil, you're not going to be able to get this off. We hope that you found this video helpful and been able to make healthy snacks for your family. I know that it's difficult to be able to shop for healthy food, but if you put your mind to it, you'll be able to do things for your family in your kitchen to help make them healthier and have a better outlook on what they eat. Thanks for watching and have a great day.